the league by a long shot. We got some mailbag questions here, all after I got to take a trip to beautiful Kansas City and eat some barbecue. Life is good. Let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to the Chief of North and RGR Football. I'm Seth Kaiser, Minnesota Chiefs fan, the Chief of the North, whatever you want to call me. As we do every week, we're here to talk some Chiefs and talk about some of the things that I'm writing about on the Chief of the North newsletter, some of the more important things that I think are going on currently in Chiefs Kingdom. What we do every week, we start off maybe with some mailbag questions and then some things I'm writing about the Chief of the North newsletter. One thing I do want to talk about very briefly as I record this, it's 12:21 p.m. on October 24th. I know people are going to be asking about Justin Ross, Chiefs wide receiver, who has, based on what I've seen, he's been charged with a couple of misdemeanor charges, one of battery with a domestic violence tag, one of misdemeanor damage to property. People are going to be asking me about this because I'm an attorney. I'm a prosecutor. I've probably prosecuted 500 domestic assaults in my day. So I know people are going to have questions. So I'll talk about that initially. And then we're going to get to mailbag questions. We're going to talk about Charles Omenihu. We're going to talk about balance. We're going to see if we can get all of that done in about 18 minutes or less. We'll see how it goes. But I do want to start off with the Justin Ross thing because I know people often want me to talk about stuff like that because of my experience doing this stuff. I've been an attorney for a little over, coming up on a decade. Good Lord. Anyway, and a lot of my time has been spent prosecuting criminal stuff, including domestics, both misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor felonies. That's how they're divvied up in the state of Minnesota. Here's what I'll say with regards to Justin Ross's. These are charges that just came out yesterday. I haven't seen the police reports. I haven't seen the complaint. I've seen Sam McDowell reporting that the alleged victim, and I'm always going to say alleged victim just because that's the terminology that we use in court. I'm not talking about the truthfulness or veracity of the report at all. It's not a statement on anything they do. That's just proper language to utilize when talking about things like this in the legal world, because at this point they are an alleged victim and an alleged offender. And so that's why I'm saying that I want to be cautious about how I frame these things. She alleged, apparently reported that she was dragged through the house. He might have broken her phone based on, again, the reports. Here's what I would say. Domestic violence cases are incredibly serious, also incredibly difficult to prosecute because it occurs in the home, in a zone of privacy where there's, generally speaking, there's not going to be any video evidence, generally speaking. Now, that's not every case, right? Everything I'm going to say is 80% of cases, 85% of cases. You're generally not going to have video evidence. It's generally just going to be a couple people involved, and it's the whole he said, she said, or he said, or she said, situation. So in cases like that, it's just an incredibly difficult thing for teams to know what to do, because there are many cases where a report is made and that report is verified or continually backed up by the alleged victim, and then that's prosecuted and borne out. There's also a pretty decent sized number of cases where initial statements get recanted or shown to be incorrect. That's not the majority or even close, but it's a large enough number that I, as a prosecutor, when I get a domestic violence report, I'm very cautious about trying to determine the veracity of the events that are reported and what corroborating evidence we have that it occurred, because the number of cases where these things happen in the blink of an eye, in the heat of a moment, there's a lot of emotions there. The number of cases I prosecuted where things weren't quite what were initially reported or were far away from what were initially reported is more than high enough for me to be really cautious. And I think that's for me, but I'm the government, right? I have a duty to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt that it occurred. And teams and employers have no such requirements. And so because of that, they're not held to the same standard that I am, and shouldn't be, right? Because I have the ability to put someone in jail or prison for what they do. And so the government should have a very high burden to demonstrate that, and should be a very cautious thing moving forward. Teams, I think, have to be somewhat cautious, but I don't think they have the same burden that I do. Or that the government does, I guess. I would say in my job prosecuting. So in terms of the Justin Ross stuff, we just don't have a lot of information yet. What we do have are allegations that are bad. And I would anticipate the team doing something. Maybe they wait for the legal process to bear itself out. Maybe they try to conduct an independent investigation. I'm not sure. But I do think it would be surprising. There is, in the NFL, there is kind of a rule with these kinds of things. And one of those rules is that it depends on who you are, on how patient a team will be in terms of letting the process bear itself out. If you are a star or a starter, teams are going to be a little more patient and maybe kind of hopeful that maybe the report wasn't quite accurate initially, or maybe something didn't really go down the way it did, right? Teams are a little more patient with that. For guys that are on the fringe of a roster, a lot of teams don't want to deal with it at all. It's a very cold-blooded business decision the teams often make. So I'm curious if they go that route with Justin Ross. But I would just say that that's we have very limited facts right now. Well, we have very limited allegations right now, and so I think the proper course of conduct in something like this, in my opinion, is whether it's a temporary decision in terms of separating someone out while this process bears itself out. I would just note, as someone who sees a lot of these cases, even if someone's not alleged to have been, punched in the face repeatedly or, beaten with a bat or whatever, right? It's always worth trying to keep in mind. A good rule of thumb is, what would this look like if it were on video? And that's something that I have to relearn about twice a year when I get a case where things are actually on video. And the things that I see in reports every day are put in front of me. And it's astonishing how much worse it is when you really have to watch it. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of trying to understand, well, dragging across the floor doesn't sound as the things that you'd see in a movie or sound as bad as other cases that you've heard about. But try to picture, if again that's what occurred and that's the allegation that's out there, try to picture what that actually would look like in real time, and how frightening something like that would be. And I think you see why teams are very hesitant to get themselves involved in anything like that. To take a phrase from my friend Josh, when they did Only Weird Games Without Me, this all came out live while Nate and Josh were recording, and of course the lawyer, was not present to help talk about it. I tried to throw a few things in the comments. I'll say what he said is, now I get to try to pivot somehow and talk about sports. I think that's easier for me because, like I said, I've prosecuted a couple new domestics this week. It's something that I see. And so the compartmentalization of that comes pretty easy to go straight from, one thing into football. So what I'm going to do is take a look at some of these mailbag questions we've got. We'll talk about Charles Omenihu. We'll talk about the Chiefs bounce. We're going to, again, get this all done in 18 minutes or less. Thank you for asking mailbag questions as ever. If you want your mailbag questions to be given priority, put them in the comment section below. Try to put a question mark or a bunch of them in front of it so I can find them a little bit faster. I appreciate you guys as ever. It's one of my favorite things in terms of just being able to respond to what people are wondering about. Let me see. Ricardo Chase and a few other people asked, do you think we need to make a trade for wide receiver? Yes or no? Love your channel. Peace and blessings. Thank you very much. Honestly, like, if I were the Chiefs, I would look at how things have developed. And you see that Rashee Rice every week seems to be developing a little more. Something fans should keep in mind: development is not linear in the NFL. So don't be surprised if Rice, he's been kind of going up a lot quicker than we expect. Don't be surprised if you see a lot of, ups, downs. The idea is, is it eventually curving up, right? But it's going to not look smooth all the time. And so right now, on the heels of a really good offensive performance that had a few hiccups, I think a lot of people are like, no, we'll be fine. MVS, had some good plays deep, and Rice was good, and Moore had a couple of quick conversions, and McCole Hardman helped out with a third down conversion. No, we're fine again. And that is the NFL cycle talking to you. The reality is we focus way too much on the singular results of every game, and it's the most recent game that we tend to utilize to make our decisions. I personally think that, of the receivers that are currently on the roster, none of them have shown the ability to be a consistent, not just game-breaking type, but like a separator against man coverage, and someone who can really help Kelsey out against a talented defense that's playing aggressive man looks week after week after week. Even Rashee Rice, who's looked like the best of the bunch by a sizable margin, hasn't necessarily shown that. It's worth noting the Chargers played a ton of zone in the first half, and the Chiefs ate it up, which they always do. In the second half, when they did a little more man coverage looks, and I was there live, so I was able to watch it. you could see some of the difficulties guys had separating a little bit. Rice is still learning. I think we had a comment actually from last week by Jay Fisher. He noted that Rice doesn't work the leverage of the defensive backs. That is something that he is not used to yet. He doesn't necessarily. It's not just quite as simple as being really quick and really fast to get separation. It's also understanding how to look at, okay, is this defensive back in front of me? Is he working inside or outside leverage? And utilizing that to try to set him up with where you want to go, and understanding how to get your body into him before you make a cut, things like that. So Rice can continue to work on that, but right now he's much more dangerous against zone looks. So the long road to the short thought is that they still don't have a guy unless Rice becomes that guy, or again, Tony or someone that they kind of hoped would be, this offseason. They don't have a consistent man coverage separator or winner. Again, I think Rice has shown the most to be able to be that guy, because he also can be a contested catch guy. If teams are going to switch to man coverage looks, he's going to be able to run, quick slants and outs and comebacks that take advantage of his physicality and his build to where he can win that way, similar to how Juju Smith-Schuster did last year. So there's an argument to be made that they're in a better position than they were. And with Hardman, a guy that can outrun guys on drag routes, stuff like that. But I would still at least be considering it if I were them, even though the most recent performance is a good one. So that was a long answer, but it's just something that I think is really worth noting. You don't want recency bias, even in the NFL, because that's what we do, right? We live and die by the most recent game. You don't want that to color your entire opinion. Ryan White asks, he says, Seth, you, among many others, kept defending MVS during the offseason, saying he's an integral part of the offense, which he was last year. He didn't say that, I did. Because of what he could do to defenses, taking the top off, keeping them honest. I was always the mind we could do without him, a shrug emoji. He just hasn't shown any level of consistency or really any level of impact to this point at all. Now, with the start of the season wrapped up, do you believe his $14 million cap next year, the Chiefs retain him or move on? And what would you do? It depends on what happens the rest of the season. I think it'd be easy for people to look at, MVS having a pretty good game this last week and, he's back. We'll see. Had Mahomes gone to him instead of McCole Hardman on the other side of the field, and I don't think Hardman was even and he was leaving, so I think it was a fine read. You don't, if you've got the look you want, you don't go to the next read. So him not seeing MVS isn't necessarily a denigration of Mahomes. It's just what happened. MVS actually had more separation on the other side of the field. So let's say Mahomes goes to him and they hit a 50-yard touchdown or whatever it would have been in terms of yardage on that play. Does that change who MVS is on that play? No, not really. And so I would just say this: $14 million is a lot, and considering that he has not been able to necessarily build on what he did last year, I think there's a good question to be had there, depending on whether or not they think they have someone that can be a legitimate deep threat. Do they think Justin Watson can build on the stuff that he did this year? In terms of being able to separate a little bit deep, even though there's not a lot of other stuff he can do. If so, then I think you get a little redundant with two guys that are, Matty Lane said it this way, and I really liked it, that are kind of slow burners in how they get open. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense. And $14 million is a lot of money. When you look at like a Jacoby Myers making $11 million a year, guys that can separate at multiple levels instead of just one. So I would tentatively say probably not in my case, but I'm not sure what the Chiefs will do with themselves. The contract was built so they could move on next year very easily, though. My guess is they'll either try to restructure it or extend it with a different kind of hit or move on. But so much football left to play. So for me, it's going to be all, what do things look like at the end of the year? And what does the total body of work look like? Sherry Street asked, what would you think of the Chiefs trading for Hollywood Brown? And I had a few, there was a Latrell 5517 talked about KJ Osborne, Hollywood Brown, Daryl Mooney, Pittman with the Colts. I think the big thing for the Chiefs is if they're going to be, if they're going to trade for another receiver, they need to make sure that it's someone that they think can pick up the offense pretty quickly and someone that can separate at all three levels against man coverage. And so that's where, some of the guys that you're going to have available might not necessarily be that type of player. I think finding another, kind of wide receiver 3 type would be a mistake. I think you need to find someone that you think is a legitimate wide receiver 2, whose skill set does not overlap with Rashee Rice's. So And so with that in mind, that might be where someone like a Hollywood Brown makes sense. Pittman's skill set, one could argue, overlaps with Rashee Rice's to an extent, but he's a boundary guy, and Rice is a guy who can utilize more in the slot. So I wouldn't hate that fit either. So that's the big thing is I think you need to start planning what you're doing with that other wide receiver around what Rashee Rice does well, as well as, of course, Travis Kelce. So I think you're looking for more of a guy that can play inside and outside, which on a side note, Rashee Rice played a lot of outside in college, and his depth of target was something like 14 yards. And so far, the Chiefs have utilized him a little more shallow, like most of their offense is right now. But I am curious as they continue to layer things in and he improves on his route running, I think you might see a little more of that. All right, I think I've dealt with most of the questions. Am I pre-post millennial? Someone said, if you know, you know. I'm not going to get into it. So, a couple things that I really want to talk about this week. And I'm good. The first thing is something that I wrote on the Chief North newsletter as well. Where I wrote about Charles Omenihu, who had his first action as a Chief. And as everyone knows, he collected a few pressures, a sack, a pass defense that led to an interception that was really crucial in the game. So I wrote about him right away and just saying that he, like, the importance of adding a dude to the Chiefs pass rush. We've talked about this before. You know, what is the difference between a dude and a guy? Well, it varies, but you know it when you see it. A guy is someone who can be part of the complementary pass rush, who's going to win one-on-ones sometimes, but not quite as frequently as you'd maybe like. But he's a guy who can execute the defense well. He can participate in stunts, twists, that sort of thing. He's a guy that you're glad to have on your team, but he's not necessarily the driver of success. Right now, George Karlaftis is at that point. Great effort guy, great motor, has improved from last year, looks a little more comfortable getting around the edge, good strength. But he's not winning one-on-ones quite consistently up to where you call him a dude. But he's definitely a guy and a good guy to have on your team. Same with Mike Dana. Both of them are good guys, but they're not guys that you would have the pass rush function around. And we saw that like against the Vikings when they had a really good plan for Chris Jones. The Vikings were able to, by and large, have a lot of time for Cousins, and they just performed really well against the Niners as well. So maybe that's just something about their offensive line too. That's worth thinking. But a dude, Chris Jones is like a level above a dude. He's like the dude. But a dude is someone who can win one-on-one at a higher rate, as well as maybe execute those other aspects of the offense even a little bit better. But a lot of it is about one-on-one wins. And that's where Charles Omenihu did show off just a few plays, his ability to win quickly. And that's something that I got excited about. So I wrote about him being an impact guy. You know, a guy is a guy that might impact the game once or twice. A dude's a guy that might impact the game 3 or 4 times. And that might not seem like a huge change, but it really is, in that when you think about, you know, you got 60 snaps, you know, maybe only 45 of them, 50 of them are dropbacks. Having someone who can win just a couple more times a game, it can swing games. And that's why in the NFL, those margins are so narrow between what makes a player an okay player, a good player, and an elite player. Those margins are quite narrow. And so there's a couple things I just want to point out. Go read it at the Chief of North newsletter. But the Omenihu sack, something to notice here. So you watch how he starts off upfield and then cuts inside, while Chris Jones, who's playing inside him, goes completely upfield. They're executing essentially a stunt here, where Jones gets upfield, draws the guard with him, and then Omenihu starts off upfield, but then cuts inside, almost utilizing the guard as a bit of a screen, right? And then he's able to disengage. The right tackle can't continue to engage without holding, and he collects a sack. You know, you see how this all works together here, right? Karlaftis having a decent rush to the edge to where he's pushed deep, but not crazy deep. It's a decent rush against an elite left tackle. And then you've got Jones pushing up the field, cuts off avenue of escape here. Quarterback's going to naturally step up. And then Omenihu, knowing this, cuts inside. This play doesn't happen without all 3 of these guys doing their job. And that's what I mean by complementary pass rush. It doesn't just increase the frequency of pressure, because it's not as simple as, well, this guy wins 20% of the time. This guy wins 15% of the time. 35% of the time. That's not quite how that works because sometimes they might win on the same drive. Sometimes you might have kind of more of a neutral snap, but still a decent one to where it helps the entire play get executed. That's what I would call George Karlaftis's rush there. And if you have guys who are not losing across the line, and then a couple guys that are winning, it's not just the frequency of pressure, it's the intensity of pressure that increases, and that's just so important. And so that's where having someone who can execute those at a little higher level is important, and also a guy who can win one-on-one very quickly works. And this is one of my favorite snaps of the game, where Omenihu engages, shows off his power and bounce through contact, some athleticism to close quickly. But his length and power is something that he wins with very well inside. And you can see here with Jones winning to the outside pretty well here, the man corners like a freak. It's unbelievable. But you see that, like, if you picture Omenihu getting stonewalled here, then Herbert would have a place to step up. But he doesn't because of this quick win. Also, Mike Dana does a really nice job collapsing the pocket. That's what I mean by the intensity of pressure, okay? If you picture any one of these guys not having as good a snap, let's say Dana gets stonewalled, and as him and Karlaftis are attempting to utilize that same game we saw in our last snap, then he might be able to fade, scramble left. If Omenihu doesn't win this quickly, he might be able to jump into the pocket. If Jones doesn't win quickly, he can run away from Omenihu around the side here. Complementary pass rush, it coming from multiple areas helps it work. And again, it's not just about frequency of pressure, it's about intensity of pressure. So the last thing I want people to notice, and it is going to take pretty much all of our time here, one of the final plays of the game where there was a pick thrown by Justin Herbert, I thought it was fun to note that you had something really similar to Omenihu's sack and how they executed things here. Jones is on the edge this time. Omenihu pushes up the field, and it's Jones that cuts inside. It's basically it's a mirror image of what you saw previously, except with Jones on the outside. And him and Jones executing these games well together right out of the gate, because both of them are really good at penetrating up the field, drawing attention, and both of them are really good at, with their strength, disengaging at a certain point, and then they're athletic enough to cut inside. These two, Spags is going to have a lot of fun with them. All right. I have already used up more time than we have. The next thing I'm going to be writing out the Chief of North newsletter is something that Aaron Schatz wrote about, formerly of Football Outsiders. He's the guy that handles DVOA, which is one of the very best stats out there in terms of how consistent you are at moving the ball or preventing the opponent from moving the ball. He tweeted out this week the Chiefs are the first team to be top 5 in all 3 phases as of week 7 since the 99 Rams. Lots of Super Bowl winners here in the list of other of how teams have done. Still a small sample size. We're only 7 games in, but it's interesting at least. And what I want to do is write about how the win against the Chargers was demonstrative of why that bounce can be helpful, because in the modern NFL, with how much parity it is, it's likely that you're going to have entire games, or maybe just a few stretches in a game, where even a good unit like the Chiefs defense struggles for a while. Do you have a good enough offense to help carry the load for a while? The idea, you ever heard the expression, many hands makes for a lighter burden? That's where, if you've got really good offense and a really good defense, you can count on, if one of them's faltering, the other one can step up, and vice versa, with the special teams coming in, hopefully not making any mistakes and making just 1 or 2 positive plays a game. So that's what I'm going to be writing on next on the Chief of the North newsletter. I appreciate all of you as ever. Put in any mailbag questions you want in the comment section below. As always, it is a terrific week to be a Chiefs fan. Thanks again.